Yay, so we're here. It's July 12th, 2022, and I'm here with Maya Zuckerman, a world-renowned regenerative leader who is a part of many organizations and is an anchor and a pillar in the regenerative movement for creating a system and a planet that is thriving, and where all beings thrive on planet Earth. So if you want to introduce yourself, that would be amazing.
Thank you, Glo. And uh, you introduced me in a way that I'm like, I'm not sure it's me yet. That's my inner. But I think we're all of us that are working towards creating a better future are part of it. I don't see myself as a leader. I'm just one of the voices holding a narrative. Um, my work is right now twofold. My day job, I run ops for a distributed company called Hollow and Holochain, really looking at what's the technological membrane that can actually help with new forms of governance, distributed computing, a lot of the things that are right now making the world work, but in a non-extractive way, in a much more regenerative way. So that's my day job. And I'm also finalizing my MBA. And my focus is a question because at this point in time, I think the focus needs to be on collaboration and cooperation. And I asked the question, how can multi-stakeholders create an enduring collaboration or create or be an enduring collaboration to create regenerative and circular cities. And I asked the question about cities, just because it's a place that a lot of us understand, and it's a place that needs a lot of work, and it's a place that right now 55% of the world population is living in, and it's going to grow. And there's a lot of conversation around escaping the city. Oh, let's go back to the land. And my question is like, what if we make the cities regenerative so we can actually leave the land to indigenous stewards? Because right now we need to actually rejuvenate and regenerate the land. Yes, we need to be there, but we can't be there all the time. We need to give some space for the others, for other other beings and the entities to be there, um, other people of not that are not two-legged. So so that's a little bit about myself. And I also really have been looking at the concept of the regenerative narrative because of the dystopian narrative that is the mainstream. And I think right now the solar punk narrative is the one that's like really subversive, because it's not the one that we're going towards. It is really one that is science fiction, because the reality that we look outside is actually more like, a lot of it can be more dystopian. So I'm really wanting to for us to create and tell more regenerative stories.
Amazing. It's so incredible that you're doing all this work in cities. And I'm curious to know, how are you going about this MBA, and what is your research like? What is the process of asking this question, and how are you finding out information?
So the MBA is with a really lovely university out of the UK. The UK is actually leading with a lot of new economic models, circular economy and donut economics. And there's a lot of really interesting thought leaders from there in the EU. Not that there aren't here in the United States and everywhere around the world, but there's some really interesting things happening across the pond. Since it's an MBA project, it needs to deal with both kind of academic philosophical literature and come into like, what's the here and now. So the way I've been looking at the study is, don't have enough time or enough reach, but I've interviewed several people and have looked at the different groups of stakeholders they belong, from city leaders, city workers, to regenerative consultants, people working with space and place, to community developers, to community designers, indigenous people. And I've left, even though I couldn't interview, but I've left also a section to place, and that's where like commons, digital places, the things that we actually have in common, air we breathe, water, etc. So the concept of the commons, what we call nature, which is things that are not human, that like we're still nature, but things that are not human, like our Robin Wall Kimmerer calls it our earthly gifts, or what in the industry and economics they call natural resources. So I don't like that word very much, but our living systems as a stakeholder in cities. So biodiversity, our trees, our animals. A lot of animals have moved back into the city because of agriculture, because there's actually more food in cities. And then another stakeholder are future generations, really the 7 generations down, and looking at the Haudenosaunee constitution that really brought in that question, not only our living system, but how every decision we make is going to affect people down the line. And people, again, using the Native American people, a concept which is all people, the 2-legged, the 4-legged, the winged, the stone people, the tree people. So really looking at that kind of general conversation. So, and again, how do you do that within a business case? And I believe the collaboration to implement these transitions to more, and I use the word secular donut, regenerative, because they're kind of similar, but there's some nuance to them. And how do we actually create better collaborations between these people? Because if we don't do that, we just are in reaction versus in designing what we actually want to see. And what do those cities look like? These are really big questions. I kind of narrowed it down to, well, what does collaboration look like? Because I still need to adhere to an academic process. So, which is a interesting thing when you talk about complex systems, like, because regeneration is non-reductive. It's a non-reductive process. And really marrying academia with its reduction, and it, reduction can actually, like, being in a reductive process could be really great. It's how you make syrups and tinctures and all those things, but also understanding that really that we're looking at a holistic system, and a city can be looked at as a complex system, a complex adaptive system. So how do we actually work with a city when it's not a one thing, it's a very diverse and interesting system. So that's a little bit about my my deep dive into these topics.
How would you share like the vision or mission of like what the regenerative movement is doing? Can you describe that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not the mouthpiece. I think we all are. But for me, it's moving from the place we are at right now, which is barely sustainable, into a journey of reconciling and restoring our relationship to what we can call, quote unquote, nature, living systems, and ourselves, in order to create to create conditions on this planet that are conducive for life, and in a way that is thrivable and thrivable and habitable for future generations, and of all beings, not only of us. Or as my short, I know that now the Buckminster Fuller Institute even has shortened it, and I've done that before. The question of how do we make this world work for all beings, or all living beings, in the shortest amount of time.
Uh-huh. Could you talk a little bit about your concept with the collective journey? Because
Mhm.
you touched on it at Lucidity Festival, the individual versus the collective hero's journey.
Yeah. So this is a model that I worked with a mentor of mine, Jeff Gomez, years ago. And we're even in our relationship, I would call myself the particle and he's the wave, and the wave particle slit quantum mechanics test, if you ever heard of that. And really it is the narratives that have been taken over, specifically Hollywood, and they're not completely Joseph Campbell, because Campbell had much more of a diverse collective view. It really is kind of the formula that ended up in Hollywood, is very a monomyth of the lone hero leaving the house and going on a journey, and their journey. And it's actually so not completely traditional and ancient myth. Like there are stories like that, but there are other stories. They're missing stories. They're stories of the people that were left out either because they weren't deemed important or intentionally were left out during specific periods of the civilization's history. um, and and how to actually reconcile the true stories that are out there. And the true stories were collective. And even Ursula Le Guin has a great framing that the first story wasn't the hero's journey, but it was the bag narrative. Because before we went out and hunted, we needed to collect stuff. So women collect stuff. We also have a bag where we have children. If you want to think of the womb as a bag of from within things come out. But also, how do we collecting seeds, collecting fruits, collecting berries. That's how we actually collecting medicine, collecting mushrooms. So we first collected. So it's a gatherer hunter, not a hunter gatherer. And even if you're seeing, and I mean, there's a lot of like there's a lot of research around what came first, and we don't know. That's a very emergent process that took over 150,000 years. But even when you see animals now that have started using tools, it's more to eat things, not to kill, um, to collect. So those are the narratives that kind of we're playing around, but truly we're a collective narrative. We started with a clan and then a tribe and then a village. So we are about the multiplicity of narratives. And so, a few years back, I started noticing the transition that is happening in mainstream cinema, in mainstream television, from these like just the hero to the Avengers, just the one person's narrative to everybody's narrative all over the place. Game of Thrones, like that's a really great example. And it started showing up in all of these places. Like if you actually see more and more television shows, they're less about the one person, they're more about a collective. They're showing the different perspectives of people. Even the small stories are less and less about the one hero. And that is because it's needed. It's needed in the world to have the multiple diverse perspectives. There's a wanting to tell more intersectional journeys. And we are in a time and place where we need these collective journeys. We need a story for this new millennium, for the issues that we're facing, because they're not simple, they're not linear, they're complex, they're diverse. And for us to start actually even facing what is coming, the framing of the collective journey is our journey together as a species on this planet, not as individuals, very much away from the individualist conversation into the mutualism of like the collective, with still having sovereignty. So the collective journey, really, if we kind of if we make reduce it down to what it is a narrative of humanity coming of age. And it is a story of the I call it the superpositioning. It's also a quantum mechanics concept. The idea that at every single moment you are yourself and you are part of the collective. And it's not only the external collective. This is actually biologically and physiologically completely correct. At any given moment, we have a filter where our mind calls it ourselves with our body and we can touch it. But we share our body with so many cultures. We are about 40% human cells, and we have bacteria and mitochondria and viruses, some good viruses, some good bacteria, all kinds of other things living on our skins. Like we're not a singular anything. We are a multiplicity and we are a collective. So I think people starting to actually realize that and then engage and understand that that's how nature evolved. Like diversity is the spice of life, is the way we actually regenerate, not monoculture. So it's like, long story from going from like, oh, a monomyth to no, it's a metamyth. It's much more diverse, even though it's really hard to find ourselves sometimes in it. And the I think the practice of our ages is how do we hold the paradox of both.
Well, being the individual, but then being like connected to everything because everything is connected. And
Yeah.
um, one of the questions I would love to know is like, what was that aha moment for you of like when you realized that everything is connected? Where were you in life? What were you experiencing?
It's probably four. That's why people are like, "You're weird." Yeah, because I so true story is a friend who's a few years older than me reminded me of a scene where we're all kids playing in the sea, and the kids are playing with the sand, and I'm asking questions about the universe because it's a cosmic perspective, and I don't know when and where and how, but maybe watching Carl Sagan as a kid, or other kind of, planetary, like cosmos, or other like things like that, astronomy. um but these big questions of like, are we part of this much larger thing? And I consider myself an atheist, but I'm totally like cosmic atheist, like totally believe in the cosmos, much larger than us, gives us perspective, total cosmic perspective. um and and like the more we actually are finding out about this like complex universe we live in, the more magical it looks, like the more things don't make sense, which is great. It's part of the magic, but it's also part of science. So I think for me that was under like the aha moment of hearing that we are all made of stars. That was like, for me, oh, of course. So like, who am I? I'm stars, but I'm also me. So how do you even like, so I have days like, how do you even live with that paradox?
How do you define it? How do you merge magic and science together? How would
Well,
you define
magic's
that?
just things we don't understand, or may never understand. Doesn't mean it's magic, but it's like, it's magical. It's got this like, oh wow. Science are things that there's at least a consensus through rigorous work of peer review and testing, the scientific method. So yeah, even doing, yeah, I'm doing an MBA. I'm not like deep science, just the rigor of that.
Mhm.
And I'm one person, but like will have be peer reviewed. I will be, put in through the rigor. There's something really powerful about it. Um, because you're dealing with legacy, and you're dealing with all of human knowledge. And then like looking at nature, like nature, such an amazing teacher. Like, we're trying to outsmart 4.4 billion years of evolution. It's like, right. That's going to be funny. That is funny. Look at what we're doing. It's not working because nature's like has actually done this for 4.4 billion years. I think also when science and nature align, that's, I think, where the magical moments happen. We're like, oh yeah, not going against, but going with.
Definitely. And I feel like touching back on the point of like the magic, I feel like looking at, how healers, how like Joe Dispenza healed his back, like he got through a big accident and healed it through his mind, and like just the new sphere of the collective consciousness, and like just the notion of that our thoughts create a reality. And I feel like this is a magical aspect of our universe that we don't, I mean, they are now merging it with science, but it does seem magical. It's like, wow, okay, I'm visualize something, I'm meditating, and then it manifests into my reality.
Yeah,
And then looking at like those thoughts and how they create a reality, and then the story, because the world as we know it is created through story, and that's why it's so important to shift our own stories and shift the
yeah,
narrative of the collective story, so that we can create the world that we know is possible in our hearts. And then also looking at like, I think, as an individual, when you find that greater purpose, or you can link yourself and you can connect to that greater narrative, then it gives you purpose in your own life too. So I feel like it's a really good solution to for people, because they might be like, there's so many people that are lost, and I feel like
yeah,
this narrative and this idea and this future is such an anchoring part of getting there, is having
yeah.
that narrative and having people connect to that.
Yeah. And there also, I would kind of warn a caveat of putting into too much of thoughts become things. There is part of it that is correct, but part of it is like rigor and circumstances and luck sometimes create things. So, um, because I have love hate relationship with the word manifestation, because if we truly manifest everything, then why are we manifesting this world right now? So, or is it just emergence of systems and unforeseeable cascading things that we didn't think about, like wonderful, if we remember that wonderful inventions of over 150 years ago are detriment. Like 150 years ago, like move like building the cars, like and of course 100 years ago and 90 years ago, what an amazing invention. Electricity, all these great things, right? Look at what they have created for us right now. It sounded like a great idea. We manifested, we created, but there were a lot of unforeseen consequences. So I think there is a place where not only just say, oh, this is the world I want to create, but actually do the rigor and the learning and looking at complex systems and understanding like the meadows, interfering in the system in a way that doesn't actually destroy the system. Because a lot of times we're like, oh, this is going to solve everything. All we need to do is that. But, and let's manifest it. And I think that the issue with it is, and we've done this before, is that we need to actually take a little step back and take these 7 generation real understanding or real learning of like how does that affect, how does my idea of a solution can affect down the line, look at the scenario. So I think there is part of, and this was kind of like my little caveat around that, because I had this aha moment of like with conversation about manifestation. Well, why didn't we manifest this world? Why did we manifest war? Is this just a war on ideas? Yes, part of it is for sure. It's a story war. It's a war on ideas. Um, uh, but there is a collective manifestation that built this, or was okay with this, or sometimes wasn't okay with this, was enslaved in one way or the other to build this world we're living in, and now we're slaves to it. So I think there is how do we detangle ourselves from these narratives, and then how do we do the real deep work? And that's why I brought in like Bill Reed and Carol Sanford's From Sustainability to Regeneration. Kind of, there's Daniel Christian Wall in his book Design Regenerative Cultures has this like beautiful updated graph, but like the origin of it is Bill Reed and Carol Sanford. So there's like an evolution of that, and then Daniel Christian Wall took it to the kind of next beautiful evolutionary state. But it really is the in between sustainability or the non-sustainability which we are at to regeneration is reconciliation and restoration, and that's like hard work. I don't think it's actually the work of manifestation, it's the work of work. It's like, and the prize of it is more hard work, so I think there is a little bit of like, yes, the narrative is important, the stories are important, but the hard rigor at this point, like, the metaphor I would say, we can ask to manifest the idea of a clean beach in Santa Barbara, but no great thoughts is going to clean up the tar out there. That's just like hard, horrific work, So same thing with so many of the places that have been degraded and destroyed. Like, it's hard work of reconciliation and restoration, and it's deep work. So I'm actually more excited about that for humanity than, because when that happens, then we're actually on the path. If we just talk about it, then we're not on a path. That's my worry a little bit. So I'm just kind of voicing it.
Mm. John said a similar thing. He's very into like we have to restore the land,
Yeah.
and John D. Liu, when we were visiting him, speaking with him at the land, uh, and I think that's so beautiful. Like the whole concept of like, I mean, it's really reconciliation with like with our consciousness and with each other, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to know what you've discovered with your MBA of like the enduring collaboration, right? Because like that's really, it's like the long term
Yeah.
motion
So,
forward.
yeah. So here's kind of the interesting things, and I brought it up in my talk, I think, in the city as well. Is like the last few years, I've been going into more of these large organizations and cities, and talking to the people who work there, and finding specifically in cities, there's something really interesting. A lot of the people are also, I'm talking to people, I'm more in the environmental side, so it's kind of my people, but hardworking, knowledgeable, tireless, dedicated, um, and then kind of not recognized. Um, And very similar to the people that we saw during the COVID crisis, especially the first surge or surges, the people who were holding our quote unquote civilization together were the nurses, were the people who were doing cleaning, where people were serving our food. It's the people in the liminal spaces that are the important people. And I think there is a little bit of the, oh, they're actually doing the work that we all need to do. They're doing the hard work. They're doing the daily grind. And I think that's something that really is showing up, that there is a disconnect between some of the groups looking at kind of regeneration and then looking at what cities and some of the local governments are doing, because there's a huge difference between city governments and local governments and bioregion governments to states, nations, bigger, international. There's something really beautiful happening there, which is collaboration and enduring collaboration and wanting to talk to multi-stakeholders and doing the hard work and doing reconciliation with native and indigenous groups. Not all everywhere, not perfect at all, but there is something there that I think is a bit missing from the conversation of like, they're trying to reach out, they're trying to create facilitation, but I think there needs to be a, hey, let's actually see what local governments are trying to do. They're the ones that are putting the, fixing the potholes and, helping when sewage is exploding and seeing to it that the nonprofits have a space to give food. If there's a food bank, I have a food bank next to my house. Those are the, and yes, it is the work of NGOs as well, but it's like when you actually talk to the city workers, they're like, oh yeah, of course we do a lot of multi-stakeholders. We work with the native groups here. We work with the different community-based organizations. We support them with whatever we can. So there is a little bit of the disconnect of, there's power here, there's a way to interact, and I think there's a lack of communication. So I think that's the biggest thing for me is like, how do we're all in the same team. So how do we start having these conversations, even in, and it was somebody in lucidity as well, speaking to the person, not the role. I think that was like my big, like aha from lucidity. It was like, thank you. Humans, let's talk to each other, especially if we're trying to do something. We might be kind of, a lot of times we talk to, depending on the level of the city leader, they'll talk sustainability all day. They'll talk waste management. And you're like, cool, how do I talk to you about regeneration that you will understand what I'm talking about? So I think there is that work. And that's part of reconciliation, even our relationship with the concept of roles that are designated in our society. And yeah, the interesting thing is you will find, and I have found, like dedicated, smart, human, very very different kind of people when you actually, but they're very siloed. So I think the siloing is not healthy for any of us. And they would want to hear, they're like, great, I was in another symposium before the pandemic, and a board member from a Bay Area city was like, we would love to implement more sustainable and regenerative. Give us a suggestion. We don't know. Like, come to us with suggestions. We're open to hear, we're open to see what we can do. So I think it's the hard work of enduring collaboration is lots of communication, lots of coming together, lots of exchanging of information. Like specifically, what I'm seeing, which is really rich and amazing, is all these eco villages and regenerative farms come and teach the cities how to become more of that. It's not going to be perfect, definitely not. We're not going for 100. We're going for can all cities become 20% more regenerative in 15 years? Like, what does that look like? So I think that's for me what I'm really, really, really seeing is that it takes longer. It's a process. We need to be in conversation with these different groups and entities and organizations. So anyways, that was my soapbox.
Yeah. Um, what are like the top pieces of, because you were mentioning it when we had our last conversation about different changes within cities and government. Like, what do you think are like some top news pieces that you'd like to share? Because you're talking about different different organizations and different things that are going on?
So huge thing that is happening in global cities, specifically with a group called the C40. Some of the so the C40 is kind of it's growing. It used to be 40 cities, now it's like 197, and they're trying to bring in more cities from developing nations. But right now, as it stands, they are a twelfth of these cities hold a twelfth of the world population, and something like I think they're 25% of economic power. Huge.
Mm.
Like, and what are they talking about? How do we make more biodiverse cities? Or really are working on biodiversity in cities. The mayor of London has basically said they want to be the most biodiverse city in the world. That means like bringing in beavers and other animals which used to be there and not there now, like really supporting how do we reconcile our life in the city with nature. I'm seeing here in San Francisco, they just built a new park. Took them 10 years. Things take a long time, but the park helps with the movement of animals. There's many more coyotes. Again, some of the reasons is because of agriculture and not finding food outside the city. So like biodiversity, huge. The UN, UNEP, all of them are pushing that, but cities are pushing more biodiversity in cities, things like planting more trees, um, canopies, breaking sidewalks, more rain capturing in cities. And you see it, I mean, even in my neighborhood, like I've lived here for a long time, the changes that have happened, the types of birds I'm sitting and seeing in the middle of the mission because of that. So that's just 10 years. And it's just a little bit what happens if all the major cities in the world go through this. And some have already begun. Things like the donut city and circular city movement, Amsterdam as a donut. That is Kate Rayworth's work, and having a whole city ask the question, you know, how do we make a city that is thrivable for all of its people and nature? And a city asking that question and then implementing the solutions and then asking how are we sustainable for the world? What is our responsibility for a more habitable world as a city? So those are some of the kind of the big movements that are happening. Circular cities is another one. More that's kind of more about supply chain and keeping materials within cities and using regenerative by design materials and products and the way we move things. 15-minute cities are another thing where instead of using cars, you can get anywhere within 15 minutes, either using your legs or a bike. So encouraging bicycling, which again changes the focus on humans first and cars later, or humans and others in the city versus actually having city structured around cars, which I created this kind of American city that we know and don't like. So yeah, so that's kind of some of the movements. And again, like what happens when cities align on that. And there are, so here's another kind of great example of things I've learned. I didn't know that there's a West Coast group called the PCC, the Pacific Coastal Coalition. I think that's their name. They're a coalition of California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. And really, they're all about making the whole area more regenerative, more sustainable, removing global emissions, GHGs, and then also having some of the cities, kind of the big cities from the region, play more stronger participatory roles. So there is these like very interesting movements that are happening on very large scale systems. So again, how do eco villages, land-based communities interact with these very large organizations? I think there's a lot of room there. I think the issue that is happening is I think people are not aware of each other. Hey, we're all working on the same team. Well, what can we help you with? And I think there's more and more of a I mean, I've messaged again, I have the MBA, I'm doing an MBA, can have a conversation. So I got a yes from almost everybody that I turned to. And it was really interesting for me to talk to the cities because the city workers, they were all really excited about what they do. So actually having a conversation, hey, we're doing this amazing regenerative project. How do we talk to a city to let us play? Where does play come in? And then of course there's really great community-based work, like in every city. People coming together, creating community, creating um, uh, beautiful gardens, teaching each other how to plant. Like there is a lot of that movement everywhere, and it is run by just people in the community doing just excellent, amazing regenerative work.
Incredible. Who would you say have been your favorite people that you've spoken to in terms of your MBA and what you have learned of like
Well,
specific?
I can't. I don't want to say names because I have a ethics thing where I cannot say names. So that's part of like academic research. Um, I mean, all of them were amazing. Like it was such a rich conversation space of talking to different, and the difference is what I liked. I tried again. I didn't have a lot of time. I didn't have a lot of interviews, but I tried to bring in diversity, like global diversity, gender diversity, indigenous, BIPOC, if possible. So um, to actually hear from the different and different city people, entrepreneurs, regenerative designers and leaders, um, other type of leaders and workers in the world, community designers. Um, I think the great thing is that yes, we have a lot of issues and a lot of things we need to work through, but there's a kind of a roll up your sleeve excitement right now of, it's up to us and everybody's, but it's not up to me, it's up to us. So in the up
Hmm.
to us, it's like, oh great, I'm not by myself, there's so much work to do, let's add it. So I think there is that sense of excitement of and that's how things change. Like when you go and get to build something together, that's how you get really excited because you get excited by other people. So I think there is a call to regeneration that's happening everywhere, and I think people have heard it with all the scary stuff. Both of that, and I think that's the reality. Is our future. We're always going to have both. We're going to have like scary stuff and beautiful stuff. The question is, can we move to more beautiful stuff? Can we move to a more beautiful world? And we got to go through some hardship to get there, but it's there. It's waiting for us.
Definitely. I love how you just mentioned it's up to us. It reminds me of Gone Beyond. They have a song called It's Up to Us, and they did a prayer for clean water at Lightning in a Bottle this year. It was really beautiful, and it
Nice.
reminded me of that. It was so beautiful. I'm curious to know your work with Veeam. I met some of them when I was in LA, and
Veeam, yeah, I worked with them 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, before pandemic.
can you
Yeah.
t- can you share a little bit about the concept and the
Mm, probably can't because they've changed it to more NFT based stuff. And when I worked with them, that had a very different platform. Still, it was about creating kind of a basically smart contract for content creators to keep their information decrypted. So you always can trace who was the origin of the content, but I don't know what they're like. I've seen some stuff, but I don't know exactly what they're up to now.
yeah, it's kind of now like what I've learned is that it's a portal and a platform for artists to share their work and for people to become investors, not only just donations on
Yeah,
like a subscription base, but like on a long term investment and kind of be that platform for the creators economy, which I mean, I'd like to see something beyond that, where it's
yeah,
like just really like a portal where we can really share resources and share our skills and talents,
yeah.
and whether that be using smart contracts or not. But um, curious to know what your personal journey has been in moving into like this regenerative concept and into this work. Like where were you born and where did you grow up and how is that different from where you are now?
Um, oh, great question. I was born and raised in Israel, so very different place to San Francisco, to say the least. It's a place that shapes you a lot. It has crazy history, levels of depth, and that are kind of hard to come by here because of the way some of the history was destroyed, but also different ways of keeping history, because it's very stone age, and like there's just a lot of really a lot of monuments, and everybody built on top of each other there. So um, and San Francisco and the Bay Area just welcomed me in, opened me up. I fell in love with the redwoods. They've been my just amazing ecosystem to learn from, like a great teacher. With whales here as well, very connected to. I've always been connected to the whales, and then the fact
Mm.
that I um, can see them from a city that I live in, like that relationship to nature was so special with a city that's still a real city with all the issues and big buildings and pollution and all the stuff. Um, but the fact that they're here has been really helping me on my journey. And my journey's been non-linear, to say the least. Every few years, I kind of jump into another layer of depth, and I have like I started in the gaming and film industries, and kind of that's where my narrative work, and but very much with a very strong technological background, which has led me to work in a lot of startups. And I really thrive in startups because of the size, and I like pioneering new ideas. I like to build stuff. Um, but the whole regenerative, I've been a seeker of memes and kind of seeing where the new philosophies are going to. And regeneration is an old new philosophy. I mean, it's like it's just a new framing, but it's really where we want to go. We want to go to this place that is healthy. And I think the word regeneration for me is like a thrivable world. Like, is the world we've seen in my dreams? Like this world in the back. Um, it's something that aches us. That we see the world's. For me, I see a lot of the inequalities and issues in the world, and uh, the belief that we can do so much better than this. Or it could be wrong, could be I'm completely naive. And I'm reading a lot of historical books that say, yeah, we could be, or could be we actually are this violent. And so, yeah, that's kind of a little bit of what led me here. But that's just a great interest in how complex systems work, and can we actually affect them. I actually like diving down into deep into complexity to a
Hmm.
point. So that's a little bit about me.
Nice. What does nature mean to you, and how has nature like the whales and the redwoods like have helped you in your daily life?
Um, it's a reminder of complex systems, that I am part of that system, and that it's wiser and deeper and older than I even have concepts for. It's um, redwoods specifically, but whales as well. They're very old. They can live for very long times. I mean, sharks even more, but whales very much so. I think with redwoods, when you stand next to a both the coastal redwoods, the Sequoia sempervirens, and the Sequoia giganta, the giant redwoods, when you stand next to an elder like that, it's like your perspective of time just dwarfs. You ever met a 1500, 2000 year old tree, and you're like, this thing has been alive through all of our BS in the past 2000 years, and it's seen us like run around. And I think for me is also some of my anger and disappointment with the human species, the human race, is how can somebody have seen something like that and said, oh yeah, that's mine to take away, mine to kill. So it has shaped me a lot. As I said, I'm atheist, but when I'm in front of a redwood, I have awe that is very much to these kind of much bigger and powerful entities that are beyond our very mortal and short lives.
I meditated for a while last week in the redwoods, and it's just the power and the energy of the trees have so much ancient wisdom to share with us just by being in their presence
Yeah.
and just absorbing the energy and just the depth of like the water like between all the trees and like the connectivity of the energy. It's so amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. Um, so I'm curious to know like what are your thoughts in terms of like shifting the narrative and because I see this is one of my biggest missions is to really to show the reality of the regenerative projects and
Mhm.
to get that to the mainstream and to dissolve
Yes.
this old fear-based news that we don't need because it's continuing to create this dissolution versus your picture behind you.
Yeah. I think it's extremely important. I think actually telling the real stories of real people that are having struggles but building something beautiful. Um, there's a bit of a lack of beauty in, especially in the news. But I think there is, and I know, like, because I'm seeing what's happening in mainstream and the need for something more beautiful. I'm seeing where it's showing up. There has been some kind of hacks into the system. Um, it used to be that the only, and it still is, the only science fiction that tells a positive future is Star Trek, and even it has become a little bit negative,
Um,
just because of reality. So how do you clean it up? I love radical empathy. That's something that came out of there. But I think the importance of real stories, the importance of beauty, the importance of nature. People, they've even done studies that, like, why do people like nature shows? Because even watching nature calms you down. So I think there needs to be a counter to the destroy, like the reality show that everybody's competing um for just whatever, like fame and glory. Even though some of these reality shows can be tough, but they're actually bringing more diversity, so there is a change there, so that's great. um but there needs to be a also a solution based narrative. You can do this yourself, or you can give some money, or you can learn more about it. I think there is, the issue with the news is that they bombard us with all the calamities of the world and leaving us, the word I'm going to use is impotent to do anything. And if we actually tell a story and then give somebody an opportunity to, whether it's that project to help, but or here are things you can do, even if it's a horrible thing, even if it's like, you know, I like when there's something bad, call your senator. Like, that's actually something you can do. It's one little things you could do. I'm less about the one thing anymore with how complex things are, but giving people the opportunity to participate, to interact, to do something, to bring this to their own world, not just viewing it. Um, I think we're less and less passive viewers. We want to engage. We want to learn. I think that would be a really, really important trajectory of more regenerative stories.
Definitely. You do a lot of work with entrepreneurs and businesses. Can you share a little bit about your coaching and what you offer?
I didn't hear the last part. Sorry,
Oh,
the
can you
video
share a
just
little bit about
froze.
your coaching and what you offer?
So I'm not right now. I'm barely coaching because I'm working full time. I am advising one startup that's just really special. I can't talk too much about it yet, but they're doing a full, like, regenerative circular um, food security framework. Pretty beautiful work. Um, but yeah, that's mostly right now. If people want to interact with me, I would say call me after October. Then maybe I'll be open. But yeah, but I'm working full time with Hollow Chain, running their ops. So I used to do more consulting, and I used to consult much more with startups of all kinds. But yeah, right now I'm just advising one.
Hmm. Could you share a little bit about Hollow and the future of the internet?
Yeah, really interesting company, really interesting group. We are fully distributed, even in the way we sit in the world. So I have teammates all around the world. We're small. We are pre-beta, but smelling it literally. It's so close. We got a team that's working really hard, passionate people. and really believe and do the hard work of, well, what does a distributed internet or distributed cloud look like? How does that support people? How does it engage with people? How does it lower carbon footprint? How does it keep people safe? How does it mitigate, things that are difficult? So we're looking at all of that, and we're doing the work. And I think that's something that really is special about this team, is the hard work and the thoughtfulness, and really looking at very, very complex issues, because we're operating in the crypto world, which is extremely problematic for so many reasons. But we want to do that with integrity. We try not to hype. We're trying to, and like all of that, by the way, is online. You can find our no hype article that our CEO wrote a couple of years ago. You can see that we say, hey, we don't do all these like um, airdrops and things like that people promise you money. We don't do any of that. We really try to keep our integrity, but we're still human, and we're going to make mistakes, and we're working really hard, and we're working really hard on what is this world that we're trying to build going to look like. Because you need to work with regulators, you need to work with, bills coming in from around the world, and different kinds of like political regulation, like basically federal regulations, global regulations. How do you do that? How do you do that thoughtfully? So that's a lot of the work, like beyond just like creating the thing that we're trying to create, which is, holochain is the framework where people can develop apps, holochain apps, to create these distributed apps that we can also host. And we've built this server called Holoport. Maybe one day it's going to be this thing you download, and you can make any old monitor, old tower, a server, a distributed server. We're not there yet. Right now, it's only Holoports. So we've built those, and people are actually testing that in an alpha testing world right now. And we're going to be coming out with a publisher portal and a hosting portal. And then we have this token called Holofuel. So we have two tokens. We have the one that's on an ERC20. That's kind of the old blockchain way of mining. And then we're going to be releasing Holofuel, which is a mutual credit token. So it's going to basically account for how much is a person hosting, and that can we can pay that person, that can pay that server host Holofuel, that they can at some point be able to exchange to any other token on exchanges, or to real local currency. So that's a little bit of what we're working on. We have a ridiculous amount of articles, videos, explainers, white papers, all online for people to read if they're interested. Holo.host is our Holo website, and holochain.org is our other website. Any other combination, unless it's linked to from our website, is probably not us. And please advise us if you see anything weird, because this is also the world we're living in, where there's a lot of impersonation. There's a lot of bad actors out there. Part of the restoration and reconciliation is cleaning up that. There's a lot of work of cleanup that needs to be done. So it's been really interesting. Very rich and juicy environment to work in right now.
How do you think like the evolution will come about? Because I feel like there's so much distrust, and like, I feel like you guys can get blocked any minute, and like there's, gonna be, I feel like one way that, the only way that we can get through to, create a new sphere of media is really to be blocked and firewalled and censored first, before we can kind of break through. What do you foresee? um, how do you see Holotrain being successful in that, and building this new technology that serves the greater collective versus, the ones that want to destroy it?
Yeah, and this is kind of my opinion, and from things that but things that we are talking, there's a mutual sovereignty. Like, yeah, there are things that we want to have for, and this is why I work for Holo, because of mutual sovereignty. It's basically my collective journey. When I heard that, I'm like, oh, that's why I work here. So that's one of our tenants, and it really is about, there are things we want to do distributed, and there are places we need to connect to the centralization. And how do we create interoperability on multiple levels? Because we can't be islands. We work inside a system, and there are ways to change the system within, and there are ways that we need to actually build the new. And we need to let both of those exist at the same time. Um, there are places, I don't think we're going to get blocked, because we are playing in both worlds. Fully distributed, we have patents, we have legal trademarks that we worked hard to get. We're working with regulators, we're working with, people out there that are moving bills, etc. We're talking to them, because if we don't, then somebody else will. So I think there is that kind of, yeah, we are doing this new thing, and we're open to having conversations, because otherwise, again, we're going to be like completely excluded. And that's what happens, like if you're trying to be completely not part of the completely out of the system, sometimes you're not going to be let back in, and that's a problem. It's a world problem. um, but there are, I call those double agents, the people who work in the system to change the system from within. Doesn't work all the time, not everywhere, but sometimes it does, and when it does, it's really beautiful to see. um
Yeah.
yeah, so that's what we need to talk to people, and it's not to everybody. I mean, at this point, if people are here and just want to create create horrific things for other people, take away their rights, things like that, I'm like, I'm not going to waste my time. But if people are like, well, I work in this very different world, it's talk to me about your world. Maybe we can learn from each other. Great. Let's have a conversation. What can we learn from each other? Or what are things that we can, how do we share knowledge? Um, what are things that startups can learn from larger organizations and vice versa?
Yeah. It was really inspiring to hear the people talk on your panel with, built like working within the system
Mm-hmm.
um at Lucidity. Um
Yeah,
what
there's a lot of them.
yeah, yeah. What would you say is like the ultimate benefit of Hollow? If you could describe it for the average
Well, we'll
person.
see. I can't say, we're not really out yet. Like, we'll see. What we think it is a really quick solution for a distributed cloud, that can be interoperable and can work both online and offline. Which for things like, I bring it up because it's the easiest thing for people to wrap around. There's a partner. I don't know. The word partner is not completely correct. There's a group that we have worked with, that have built their system on holochain. They're still testing. It's still early to know. We don't know if they're going to scale, but they're really interesting, and they're looking at distributed grids, so power grids. That could be a huge benefit. So that's one place that could be really beneficial. But we're moving out of R&D into alpha and then beta. So we're still in that validation and proving that we can actually take this to the next level. Which is here's the other thing, things take longer than you ever think. And with complexity of building a startup like this, it just takes time to validate and to really show the world what we can actually do. But we're getting there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Where can we find you online?
Easiest is my full website, mayazuckerman.com.
And then hollow.host, you said.
Host is where I work. My image is one of many.
Amazing.